伦敦国王十字繁华的地区，我意外发现了一座宁静的运河船，居然是一家书店。我感到格外幸运，与那位充满激情的店主进行了一场意外的访谈。What's your name and age?
My name is Paddy Screech. I'm one of the owners of Word on the Water, the London Book Barge, and I'm 58 years old.
How long have you lived on the canals?
I first moved onto a boat about 17 years ago, and I live in a little 40-foot narrow boat, which I keep outside London.
How do you get power and energy on a canal boat?
In the old days, that was very hard. Nowadays, boats are kind of at the forefront of using sustainable energy because it's very difficult to plug into the electricity if you're on a boat that moves every 2 weeks. So nearly all boats have solar panels on the roof, and for 8-9 months of the year, free electricity. Heating is still the Victorian way, so we all have stoves, these sort of coal stoves. Just in recent years, people have started to use diesel because there is less emissions from diesel.
How and where to take out the trash?
That's an issue on the canal system because there is an organisation called the Canal and River Trust who run the canal system. And one of the things they do is they provide places for people to throw their rubbish away. So you collect rubbish in your boat in rubbish bags and you store it. And then when you get to a place where you're allowed to get rid of your rubbish, you put your rubbish bags in there. But there are not enough of those places on the canal. And so it is a little bit difficult because often you are carrying 5-6 bags of rubbish. And in the summer that can be a bit smelly. So there is always a conversation between the boaters and the Canal and River Trust about why there aren't enough resources for people who live on boats.
Would the canal boats stay parked along the canal?
There are two ways you can be on the canal. You can either have a permanent mooring, which is like a parking space that you never leave, like your home, and you will pay money, you will rent this one place, and often they will put in electricity and a tap and you will have water there. And that is quite expensive. That's like hiring a flat in London. It's the same sort of money. But there is an ancient law going all the way back to the beginning of the 19th century, I think even the 18th century. So the reason we have canals in Britain is because they were the first industrial transportation system. So when the Industrial Revolution happened, and suddenly there were factories and weaving mills in the north of England, and because of the slave trade there was cotton coming into Liverpool and the ports in the north west of Britain, something was needed to then transport that stuff to London and around the rest of the country. And this was before railways had been invented, because railways were invented in Britain about 100 years later. And so they built the canal system as a way of moving heavy loads throughout Britain. And at that time, they made it a law that a family could live on a boat. It was illegal for them to live on a boat, provided the boat was kept moving. And that law is still in place, which means in Britain, it's legal to live on your boat, provided it moves to a different place every 2 weeks.
What ways and route are available to sail?
There aren't as many as there were 200 years ago, because after the war in the 1940s and 50s, when they were rebuilding the country after all the bombing, they turned a lot of the canals into roads because they did not have to duplicate the engineering. They had already cut through the hill to make a canal, so they just put a road where the canal was. So many canals were lost in the 50s and 60s and 40s. But you can still go from London all the way up to Leeds and Manchester, to Oxford, to Cambridge, Though on a narrowboat it is a little bit dangerous and exciting, because narrowboats are not designed not to roll, because they're just designed to sit on canals. So when you go on the Thames, it can be a bit like, yeah. Yeah, many waterways in Britain.
Why not choose to buy or rent a house?
I never had much interest in buying a house. Houses in Britain it's gone crazy. They're far too expensive, and there's just too much money. It seems unhealthy, and I would never have that much money. I worked for the government looking after homeless people, and then I run a little bookshop, and neither of those generate the sort of income that enables you to spend the £500,000 to £1 million that you have to spend to buy a house in London. But also I get depressed in houses. I am a nomad. I feel somewhere I need to move. I travel a lot in my life before I moved onto the canals as well.
Tell us about your bookshop, World on the Water. How did you come up with this idea?
So the first person I met when I bought my boat, and I drove it to London, to Hackney, and I parked it, and next to me on the boat next door, on a tired old ex-police boat, was my friend John, and the two of us together decided about 14 years ago that we would try to be bargees instead of boaters. And the thing we both knew about was books, because John had a postgraduate degree in American literature, and I did English at Oxford. And so between the two of us, we decided we would sell books. And John had been selling books for 30 years on sort of street corners and makeshift tables and pavements. So we decided to try and do it on my little narrowboat and see if it would work. But while we were making our plans, that beautiful Dutch barge that's the bookshop was parked on the other side of the river, and it belonged to a friend of ours called Noy, and he had bought the boat but couldn't afford to keep the boat. His plan was to buy it and just sell it and make some money, but he fell in love with it because it's a beautiful 1920s Dutch barge. So he could not sell it, but he needed help to pay the license. So John and I went and we talked to him, and we asked him if we could maybe rent it for a year and do an experiment of running a bookshop on the boat. But he is a bit of a visionary himself and said, no, I will give us the boat, and I will build a stage on the roof, and we will do live performance, and I will come in as a full partner. So the three of us made a partnership together to do this experiment and see if we could be a floating bookshop. Everybody knows the captive life. Everybody's got that broken feeling, like that father that don't die. Everybody's talking to. So we opened in 2011, and then we spent 7 years moving around the canal system, doing the moving every 2 weeks thing like the rule says. And it was very difficult. It was lovely, but it was hard to make it pay enough money for 3 men. We would have days where we had to choose between cigarettes and coffee because we couldn't afford both. It was not very commercial, but people slowly got to know us all over London where we'd turn up. We begged for a permanent home, a mooring, and the Canal Authority would not give us one, because where we used to park we would have live jazz playing on the roof, musicians, or poetry events, and the people in the houses would complain about the noise. So the Canal Authority did not like us because they thought we were like a party boat. And they are in Leeds, they are not in London, so they had not seen the boat. So they just thought we were some sort of London noise polluting young people's sort of party thing. So when we said that we were going to close, our followers online suddenly, like all, woke up and started writing letters to newspapers and to the Canal and River Trust, and then we got on television, and then we appeared in Private Eye, which is a very famous satirical magazine, And then the Canal and River Trust, or the authority on the canal, started getting a lot of criticism that they were closing the little bookshop. And eventually they gave us a telephone call and they said, okay, you can have a permanent home. Where do you want it to be? So we said we'd like it to be in King's Cross, and we came here. And then in the years since we arrived, Granary Square has been built, this entire complex full of like shops, and the world famous art college, St Martin's is here, and the British Library is there, the Guardian newspaper, and suddenly we realise we're in the best possible place in London to be selling books on a boat.
Do you see the future of the bookshop? And when you retire, would you close it?
I will not retire. And when we started, we were a little bit worried that maybe no one would be buying books 2 years later. What's happened in Britain and in Australia and in Canada is that there's been an explosion of people liking bookshops. And people are buying more normal hard books, proper books, rather than digital books than ever before. New bookshops are opening in England all the time. And that's because bookshops are more than shops where you buy books. They're community projects, and they're resources for people. They're live performance venues, and they're places where authors can meet readers in person, and they're places where people can go on dates, which are safe and friendly. And people don't like algorithms to tell them what books to read. They want humans to recommend books to them, because you don't want an algorithm to tell you what thoughts to have based on what thoughts you had yesterday, because they'll just feed you the same thoughts again and again. That's the trouble with algorithms. They just send you down this narrowing corridor. So it turned out that Amazon didn't get to take over the entire book industry of the world, because there are things they just couldn't do. They couldn't be friendly and small and community based, and they couldn't be humans recommending books to humans. And I hope it'll never stop. And I hope bookshops themselves never stop too, because you don't want to sit and read a Kindle with your child.
伦敦运河见证了城市的兴衰变迁。曾经，这里是繁忙的商业通道，承载着煤炭、货物穿梭往来。而如今，在这个不为人知的水域中，船坞悠然漂浮，与周围的高楼相对立。你不再被尘嚣困扰，取而代之的是水波轻拂心灵，让人忘却城市的喧闹。